Today we're talking kind of around the evolution of community development, looking at historically where community came from, the ways that communities can be different, and we have some examples of that, and what it really means to be community, and then what we see community becoming or developing or being, especially from the context of decentralized autonomous organizations. So, with that as the intro, who would like to go first?
That's an exciting topic, so let's dive into it. Let me take you back a couple of years, about 25 years, actually. Well, I could take you back a couple of thousand years into the first communities and the first tribes that existed, right? First human settlements there. But let's skip that part. Let's get right into when the word community itself, I think, became dominant and became part of the vocabulary of how we're working together, how we're socializing, and how we're solving problems together, right? So the key figure here is someone called Etienne Wenger. Etienne Wenger wrote a book in 1998 that was called Communities of Practice. That was kind of the standard work to say, let's bring these communities onto the world stage and into the context of organizations too, right? So in 1998, he wrote this and said, well, knowledge itself is actually created through a very social process, right? It has a lot to do with people coming together, right? At that time, the dominant idea was knowledge is like given, it's like disseminated top down, and you read the books and read the manuals, and there you go. Etienne said, no, that's not the case. There's another construct called community that actually is a much better way of exchanging, of learning, of gathering in spaces and to understand things, to create the knowledge in this social context, right? So he came, to write this and to say, let's try it out, see what you can do with this. And a lot of organizations read the book and said, this is it. This is the missing piece, right? We have very formal, structured environments in our organization. Doesn't seem to really work, right? So all of this tacit knowledge, that's the knowledge that sits in people's heads, right? Cannot be made explicit. We're stuck with this. Nobody wants to write manuals. Nobody wants to write it down what happens. So what do we do about this tacit knowledge? Well, communities are the solution. So he came up with this idea, and then organizations immediately picked up on that and said, whoa, yes, so this is the way to get into this tacit knowledge. And what we need to do is actually create more informal environments, right? That was the big shift, because organizations were very structured, there couldn't even be that idea of an informal space, right? Besides the water cooler, right? Communities really were around the water cooler, I think, the best place to gather and exchange this knowledge. But now came this idea of community. And that's actually also when I started to work for a consultancy where knowledge is essential, right? And our first task was really to create these communities, right? These communities of practice, and say, what can we do with that to gather everybody together in more social and more informal spaces, so we have a chance to tap into that tacit knowledge, right? That was the first stages and the first steps. Out of this came a whole slew of sort of technology innovations, end of the 90s, beginning of 2000, where there was technology like Lotus Notes. If you know Lotus Notes, it's a very social sort of kind of network community building platform. They had a tool called Domino at that time. And I was building, a lot of communities, helping the consultants to understand, here, this is a better way of getting organized, of gathering and capturing knowledge. And then also the beginnings of, well, it's not only the organizational context, it's actually reaching outside of the organization, right? So it could be client spaces, could be wider community spaces where they could actually engage in some way. Again, something unthinkable before, because the organization had thick walls around it, right? There was nothing that could penetrate it. And if you wanted to talk to them, you had to talk to some, manager, some salesperson to get into the organization. But then this loosened up, right? It loosened up inside the organization first, through these communities of practice, and then slowly, got outside the organization through these new technology platforms, right? And that for me is sort of leading into the next way of, whoa, yeah, it's a social context. There are now these social media platforms and social networking things popping up all over the place. that's a great way to create virtual communities, right? So virtual communities doesn't require people to be physically present and located in one, vicinity there. No, they can do this anywhere. They can have global spaces where they come together and discuss sort of their passion, right? Their topics of interest. And I'm sure, Alexander, you want to talk more about sort of the physical communities itself, because they existed for thousands of years. They are the ones who, gave us sort of the first ways of, hey, we're all here in this together. We have a local context now where we come here, get to know each other on a much deeper, basis, build the necessary trust, and then solve problems in a local context, right? But that's a different story. For me, I just want to focus on the virtual communities and the abilities that these new technology platforms brought into this, right? And I stop with one example here. I run a bigger community called Visual Metaphors on Google Spaces, I think it was called at that time, where Google did a fantastic job of tapping into that energy of a community, building these beautiful knowledge streams to say, we're coming together here. There's new things coming on, new visuals coming in, and people responded and commented and liked it and so forth, right? It was really great. And there were thousands of those, And then what Google did, as they always do, they shut it down, right? Nothing is left today. All of these communities are destroyed, basically. All the knowledge is gone. You couldn't even extract it unless you have a cryptic XML file that you download there, right? But that was the end of the story. So what you see nowadays is a lot of other platforms. Obviously Facebook took over with the main sort of attractor for bringing people into these new kind of communities, because Facebook is still sort of focused on extracting your knowledge, extracting your data, right? And selling that to the third party here. So not really the focus of community is at the forefront. It's this other stuff that can monetize, you and your data, you're the product in that case. But that's where we are today. And I'll stop here before we continue the journey, I think, to look at how that evolved into DAO community spaces and what's happening there. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to jump in, it's amazing listening to Joachim. I learned about history while recording this program. So I just want to bring my perspective, and I think for me, coming from place that was communist, for me, community always had this element of friendship. So the way I see communities in DAO space is that it has this intimate note of people exchanging things. Also, because I think I propose this topic today because I think there is this usage of this word community in terms of, oh, I have Instagram followers, they are my community, or like there is like people use this term all around, and then it's not very specific. And for me, just kind of I feel community has something more than just like some random strangers on internet. And my perspective on that is kind of comes from Brian Eno perspective on that, which is on Senius, right? And this whole idea that in 20th century, it was kind of, I think 20th century really amplified this idea of individual successes in terms of speaking in terms of art. We have Picasso and like all of these big artists, but technically they were kind of just some peak of the iceberg, and they were not able to produce and do the work they do without kind of the whole community. So I feel these things kind of started there, and now we are slowly recognizing, to go back on what we discussed in last episode in terms of knowledge management. It's kind of this idea where you are no longer alone, and you are kind of using, not using, but kind of we are bouncing ideas between each other and really coming to solutions. So nothing is kind of coming into vacuum. So for me, that's kind of recognition of that in this broader space. And then DAOs are trying to bridge these two gaps and say, okay, we have this broader community, and this community can consist of friends, family. It can consist of kind of our network associate, people who work in similar spaces. And it can also consist of people who are using our product. And then we are kind of, instead of approaching and having this separation between we and then we have user, I see that DAOs are trying to merge these two things all the way through kind of giving them tokens, right? So they're able from that all the way to through kind of the way you build product. I see that there is this new space developing as a result of what Joachim says. And then also maybe Gabriel can provide, I see that many ideas in agile space, in a sense, leads to that and very well go with this idea where you're kind of building with others.
That's great. I'll get to the agile bit in a second as part of what I wanted to introduce here. I'm also keen to hear, because I know some of us have been in a few different communities recently. Hypha is a community, Seeds is another community that we're connected with. Curious to hear the contrasts or the differences or what community means from those different community perspectives. Starting with a book that I read and really enjoyed, The Art of Community by Charles Vogel. And what I, the one thing, the one takeaway that I got from that book was that he says a lot of places will consider a community as a group of people with a shared purpose. He says that's what a lot of people think of as community. And he gives this extension and he says he doesn't see it as a community unless the members care about each other. And that's what he says is the defining hallmark of how he thinks of as community. So I've got these 3 bullet points. I think they're just a summary, maybe not word for word of what he says, but the 3 big ideas from The Art of Community by Charles Vogel. So number 1 is purpose driven. A community needs to have a clear purpose that its members believe in and are willing to work towards. This purpose should be communicated clearly and consistently. So that was big idea number 1. Number 2 is relationships first. Relationships are the cornerstone of a strong community. Members should feel connected to one another and be able to trust and support each other. And so that starts to feel like this concept that I remember from the book of caring about each other, right? And then the third one, final one here is continuous improvement. And this relates, I think, Arsene, to what you introduced as being agile. And it's described here, a community should always be looking for ways to improve, both for the individual members and for the community as a whole. This involves regularly evaluating progress and making changes as needed to stay aligned with the community's purpose. So again, those 3 things are purpose-driven, relationships first, and continuous improvement. I love that. And I love the idea that communities is a group of people that care about each other. Alexandra, I would love to hear some thoughts from you.
Yeah, just not sure. I hope my internet it's good. To begin with, I have been a community builder for many years in different aspects, different networks, and it's the base and the heart of who we are as humans. And to me, for the DAO community, it's something that it's very transparent. So we're pretty raw. We're taking our coat we're taking our phone off and just kind of saying, this is who I am. This is what I would like to co-create with you. And how could we take advantage of this co-creation together? And just see how community is really interesting, how you see the evolvement, the evolution of community. And now that we are in screens and doing Zoom calls and communities have become virtual mostly all over the globe, it creates this sense of a new way of bringing community together. So how do we create a more sustainable, loving, and kindness? I think the values are very, very good to bring in a community. Once we can put our shoes also in somebody else's, and another member who's having a bad day, because you don't really know what's going on behind the screen. What are the hardships? Or probably mental health issues, probably financial issues. You have no idea what you can encounter. And just by being kind in this virtual community, it helps us co-create better and align at a human level.
Yeah, and just want to add to that, I think this idea that Joachim mentioned, and it's related to DAO, I see that before we always live in communities, right? But I really see the appearance of the internet. And to be honest, my first interaction with internet were forums and chats, and that's kind of how I met the internet. So for me, internet was from the first moment kind of this social media, like media for exchange. And even when I was younger, many of my friends that I have besides school, I met online. So I always saw it like that, and I just see this really big expansion between kind of moving from local things to global things in a way. Like I would probably never find in my own country that many people who are into DAO, right? But now here we are for 4 different countries, maybe even from 4 different continents, talking about and building together. So I see that really big movement that even though I feel I was part of it from the start, I really start to feel it in Hypa full potential of it, because one part is just kind of being on social media and having ability to, let's say, write or kind of communicate to anyone. But the other part is how these things are actually kind of gathered and what happened with them. And I feel we are really like through DAOs bringing these ideas. It was there, but it was not like it was like random, like chats and forums, and it's like people were discussing, right? And DAOs having ability to like this like community with shared treasury, right? This idea that was initially promoted as DAO, I really see is pushing this forward and really bringing people to kind of coordinate and collaborate, not just have this place that also Joachim mentioned. Maybe there were different places which were kind of either hobby or professional, and it was discussion forums. But with DAOs and community, I feel we are really coming to this thing that like we are able to actually make some impact rather than just kind of having this space where we share knowledge and information.
Yeah, I agree with that. Before, community was more about exchanging information and kind of just, giving feedback and very layer of you're behind the screen. I don't know who you really are, but, just very cautious. But now we're moving into a third layer, which is more humanistic, where we can see each other. We can see, we know you, who you are, where you're coming from, and it's exchanging conversations on a daily basis. So it becomes a little more intimate in a way that you get to know who your peers are and how you can co-create. And if somebody's having a bad day, how can you help them? How can you, it's a bigger layer virtually. Because you can do this community based on land projects and on local environment, and that works perfectly. But when you bring this to a virtual space, this third layer is it's very important to achieve.
That's great. I like this idea of layers. I like this idea of, the internet was always social. The first contacts we had with the internet were kind of social, right? In some ways, there were message boards. I remember Gopher, text-based forums, right? That were difficult to use, yet they were already social, right? It pulled me in. There were conversations happening right there, right? And the doors opened up, right? And it was a very decentralized web at the beginning, right? Everybody could do its own thing, its own blog, your own website. Nobody cared. And you had your own audiences. Then we shifted into a centralized web, with the big players starting to extract and control everything. Now we're in the third stage again, third era really of a new decentralized web that is opening up in front of us. I want to come back to what Arseni said earlier about Brian Eno, of course, seniors, and the counterpart to genius, right? So the idea is, there's individuals with brilliant minds, but if these brilliant minds come together, right, they create this thing called seniors, as he called it. Actually, one of my last ventures was called Seniors. We labeled it after Brian Eno. And we did these ad hoc gatherings. We called them knowledge expeditions, where we put people into these virtual spaces, create a virtual story, like climbing up Mount Everest, over a couple of days. And you suddenly feel these real life sort of scenarios and tensions that come up as if you were there in physical reality, as if you were climbing up that mountain. The same got, reflected inside this virtual space. And that was fascinating for me to explore that more and more, right? How much of we call it a a social field can you create to build this trust, to feel like you're in company with others that wanted to go the same direction, wanted to climb that mountain, facing these, wild, experiences like avalanches or the Khumbu ice wall, before you get up to Mount Everest. It was fascinating to see how people can connect, how strong the connections can become in a virtual space, right? And that led me later on to sort of explore more in communities. Another bigger thing I was co-founding was called Digital Life Collective, and that was a space where we focused extremely well on community, right? So coming together without sort of the pressure of creating roles, creating structure, creating compensation, right, for everyone that participates. I mean, that's the beauty of community, as Gabriel laid that out. It's for relationship building, right? It's for coming together on focusing on the passion, on the topics, on the things you always wanted to talk about. That's the reason why these communities came about. And it's this continuous improvement thing, which led me really to say, hold on a minute, it's great to come together and to have these conversations, but we don't build anything. There's no sort of output, there's no action coming out of this. What can we do next, right? And exactly at that time, I actually met Reiki, who said, hey, look, we're building the Seeds community, and in order to coordinate that, we're using something new called a DAO, right? Whatever that is, I think it helps. Can you come on board and see if we can build more of this? Because I did some visualizations for the Digital Life Collective, like a network graphs, thing you recently showed, Gabriel, in your video there, and how you can see your location inside the whole network, right? And now I thought, wow, what's this DAO thing? That's exactly sort of the missing piece. It's like the other side of the coin. If you have the relationships and the strong connections and the network there, then you want to get somewhere with it, right? So you want to build something together. And that building together was when sort of, for me, it hit that the DAO can do that. It has the capacity to say, yeah, we can actually go forward together now and build something. But what we need is some kind of a structure, right? We don't want to take it too far into, well, this is a company, right? Well, this is a traditional startup where we have a boss, and we get paid and we have venture capitalists coming in. That was like the other extreme. No, we wanted to see what we can do with a DAO within a DAO context, right? That has no bosses, right? That is a decentralized organization. Nobody can tell anyone else what to do, right? Yet it has this community feel, right? And that's important. It's the same level of trust you can establish in a community among peers without any pressure of you have accountabilities and roles, yet bringing that into a DAO context. And for me, that was the starting point to say, okay, what is this DAO thing? And how can that map to the community space? So bridging the two, really connecting the two, right? What was called at that time a DAC, a decentralized autonomous community, which was really sort of the start up form of a lot of DAO spaces, like if you recall, the first early blockchain communities, a lot of developers got attracted to that. They wanted to build and build and build. But they needed a system to actually decide on what's going to come next. There are some funds coming in because people recognize this blockchain thing is big, right? So here's some funding. We're going to buy your tokens, right? But how do we make sure that the right projects are funded, right? For that, the blockchain communities created this decision space, right? They created something like a worker proposal systems, right? To say, this is a quest, this is a thing you should build. We want to build. Who's here to help us create it? And that is sort of the beginning of yes, there's a community, and now there's a community with purpose, right? Because we do want to build some new modules, some new applications for this blockchain that we are co-creating. And that sort of took off to the next layer to say, okay, what can we do to actually combine these two and say, here's a community on one side, and here's this organizational form, call it a DAO, could be anything, right? What an organization is, but then merge them together and say, every organization needs community. They need the support. They need the base of people that says you're doing the right thing. They need the participatory aspect to say, we want to contribute in some way, right? Maybe build something, and maybe I can give you my time, my space, to create these solutions that you envision, right? And that's when we sort of set on this journey to say, let's combine that and build that into the DAO product itself, right? So that it has a distinct sort of core space, for the founders, for the first people who build the stuff, who get rewarded for building the stuff, and then the much wider community space surrounding it. We called it the community donut, to then go and take it to the next level, right? But before get into that, let me pause here and then see what else we have on the plate. Over to you.
Yeah. Well, I can only speak from my personal experience. I've been, a sustainable person, regenerative person. I have always been a lover of everything regenerative, right? And I belong to many, many different tiny communities online. And the reason why I came into this DAO movement was because of seeds as well. I found a link between my life and what the community was doing there. And the great thing about the DAO that is currently happening at this time is that we have 5 different sectors, and we have the socioeconomic, sociocultural, socio-ecological, and sociopolitical, and so on. And you can actually just look for the DAOs that are in each specific sector and see what are your likes and how would you like to participate, and apply and enroll yourself to any of these DAOs to see perhaps, they have roles that you be able to accomplish, or just to give a perspective of how people can get involved is very important. Because right now we creating a different entry. It's a different onboarding system of just seeing like, okay, how can I help and where do I belong? So in the Hypha dashboard, you'll be able to see all the different DAOs and read the stories, read the descriptions, and see where could you help, and that's how it happened to me. So by creating this easy onboarding process, it helps us to be able to find our spot, in which community. And you can belong to different communities, not in a specific one. I mean, it's just something basic like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and just want to jump in because I had experience with community building, and I was kind of trying there and building for 5 years creative community in Serbia, and just want to bring this here because I imagine people who are listening to this are probably either heard or exploring the DAO idea, and then maybe they came to this video and then they are like thinking about this and excited. But just want to mention that there are also kind of hard parts of community on my end, and what are kind of some things that we realize are kind of best practices in these cases. And I would just like to bring kind of one that was for me hardest one, and I never figure out. And I think that depends maybe on. I think it has this both energy. It depends who is running the community. Then people gather around the community. But for me, the biggest part was activating people. Activating in a sense, I was organizing meetups. People would come, but there was no interaction. There was like always this like either it's not that people were not coming, but it was always hard to kind of create this two-way communication. And for me, what I also noticed, the second part is that because we are online, I feel like in terms of spirit of this time of zeitgeist, I feel that kind of authenticity is coming forward, and what kind of digital communities are bringing there. Like the way we work here, I really felt every time there was some issue that I have in Hypa, I feel it was usually if I was not honest with that issue, it did not end up being resolved. So it feels like sometimes in order to resolve issue, you need to be more authentic because like so it's like it's visible outside. So these are just kind of my 2 cents, that this interesting connection between this authenticity kind of coming through, and then also community and online communities and DAO really amplifying that. Or if you not, then I feel community cannot exist. And in the DAO space and Web3 space, it started as this pseudo anonymous, but I really that's why I was from the start attracted to Hypa, because of this decentralized human organization, and because we are really trying to keep things in human way, and then kind of use technology to amplify other aspects. So yeah. on to Gabriel.
Good stuff. Different ideas coming up for me here. One is that it used to be that we had less choice for communities. We used to be more geographically bound, right? Our community would have been the town that we were born into, and maybe the next village if we could snuck away, on a moped or something, get there, and then maybe the country that we're in. But as time has gone by, now we have online communities, we've got easy access to travel. It's like we have infinite choice for the communities that are available to us. And it's a very different world, a different perspective. And soon enough, we'll have these metaverse virtual reality spaces that allow us to meet in a much closer kind of way within totally new environments with people all around the world. I think of Balaji's book, The Network State. He describes how we're evolving beyond this idea of a nation state as having national boundaries, and we have a king or a government that rules us, and this is what we have to do, to this idea of a network state where we can connect, we can be a bigger community online, connected with people that have all of these qualities of a community that is even bigger than the nation that we come from. So the world is going through this massive transition to thinking of what counts as a community in an entirely different way, based on the accessibility through internet, but the evolution of these technologies. And I think we probably don't yet appreciate how that will change our lives over the coming years, maybe a couple of decades. I think obviously that's part of the journey of this experiment with DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and what that really means now and what it's building us towards. I just want to relate 3 pillars of community development as I came to see it in some of my work. The first pillar is being identity. I felt like we can say that's like how we relate or shared values and interests. And so that's the identity pillar. I think that's always relevant to a community. The next one that I think has been popularized is what I call edutainment, which is, there's some aspect of education to nurture the community. And there's also the entertainment value. It has to be kind of fun. And if you can mix a learning process and education with fun, then that starts to feel like a community. There's one third pillar that I felt became very relevant, and that's opportunity. And I think this is maybe where a lot of communities or wannabe communities, they actually fail and they get it wrong. And this is creating opportunity for participants to contribute, to have a way to involve themselves with projects and do things together that is giving them a way to, again, I say contribute, give back, generate something new. It's not just about entertainment and education, because that's kind of what they consume, right? You can have shared identity, then you can consume a lot of stuff. But if we can really open up and make opportunity for these community participants to add value and new experience and become better themselves through the participation, that's the way that I related to 3 strong pillars of community development.
Thank you for bringing that book. That's my field for a month now, and a lot of regenerative movements like the Refi, all these kids are like, it's their Bible. It's like such a great book to create community, strength. And what you mentioned about opportunity, thank you for bringing that pillar, because when you give somebody an opportunity that have never done something previously, perhaps, and they're interested in doing it, I think that's a major win. I see it all the time in different circles, different ecosystems. You give the opportunity to somebody to just co-create with you, and they feel the responsibility to accomplish. And that's big. That's a win. That's like a win equation for DAO successful stories, you know? So yeah, I love those pillars. They're great.
Yeah, real quick is a lot of it is to do with the engagement. A lot of communities, they fail because they don't maintain engagement, and creating opportunities, like you're saying there, Alexandra, is giving someone who maybe hasn't done something but they want to do something an ability or a space to do something new, to contribute, be generative. It's not just the identity, the shared values, but then the engagement, the loyalty, the sense of connection really comes to life.
Yeah, and just want to add, I think that all of these things for because I know how much it was hard for me building community and then not having anyone to relate to, because I think we speak about these things in ideal terms, and I think the hardest part of all of these things is that many people come with certain assumption, which is probably coming from traditional organization, which is kind of this really scarcity single player mode of being, right? It's like you are fighting for yourself, even in the companies. And then this idea of DAOs, to go back to my original idea that we talked in one of the first episodes, it's really feel like it's like crutches towards something different. It's really trying to push us to move away from that. And it's also way that we really need to embrace. It's not just like, oh, okay, now this is same thing, but online. No, it's kind of like this combination of something that I imagine kind of I imagine kind of indigenous people gathering in circle and kind of discussing things and having this participatory decision-making process in their group. And then we have this idea of technology, and then these two ideas combine. And then I think it's very interesting because it's kind of developed, the context of development of this technology is developed in the context of or time when it's like very single player, right? So I think going to multiplayer is very hard part. And in terms of bringing opportunities, first part is maybe DAOs bring opportunities, but then other people are suspicious. It's like, why are you bringing me opportunities? What do you want from me? So I just see that can be very big point of friction in order for people to build trust on this new way of operating that I think it's going to be. So I just wanted to mention that as a small details that can be.
That's fascinating. Yeah, you're right about these crutches, right? So we're helping people. Good word for that is what I learned is affordances. So affordances are sort of guidelines, ways of recognizing, oh, there's a door, there's a handle, I can push down that handle and it opens something else, right? So these kind of affordances is where I see we're attracting people, right? Where I see, come on in, here's a way to sort of feel like you're onboarded, you're welcomed. You can explore what's going on inside this thing called DAO, and you can find your home, right? Find your place. I wanted to connect to what Alexandra said earlier about sort of where we're coming from is really from a regenerative mindset, right? It's the seed space. It's the space where we came together to solve bigger problems, right? It's sort of what's at stake here, right? Well, we are in a planetary crisis, right? And we need to recognize and acknowledge that, and then think about, can we do something about it, right? The dominant mindset today is we can't do anything about it. It's over, we just have to adopt and cope with the crisis, right? I think as a regenerative, mindset person, you think differently. You think there are solutions that we can deploy, right? And our perspective here obviously is, well, we can create organizations with a strong purpose, to help restore the environment, to help build stronger communities, right? To help find better ways, coming together, connecting these entities, right? And solve these really hard and wicked problems together. That's, I think, where Hypha is coming from, right? So the soil, right here, the mycelium in the soil that connects everything together, but also this regenerative context, right? That we want to rebuild, we want to confront the planetary crisis, right? And launch, thousands of these DAOs, each DAO with a purpose, each DAO creating a community of strong-minded people willing to change stuff, right? And then within the DAO, you find where you feel most attracted to. This is where then you come in, you find a role, you find a quest, you find something that you can do now to participate in that, right? And this is a different mindset than from a traditional organization, right? I go to work for a company because I need an income, right? That's my first thinking here, right? Do they pay me well, right? Second thinking, is that a boring job or not, right? And third thinking is, okay, let me see how long you can stay there. Here it's like, whoa, this is meaningful stuff. This is impactful stuff, right? I can participate in something good and get rewarded for that, and get rewarded. And that's where the structural component comes into DAOs, right? So we're now combining the community and the DAO, right? You do need the structure. You can't say this is a community and we somehow figure out informally how people could get rewarded for the work. It works if you have everything on a voluntary basis, right? A lot of communities do that. You do gardening, good work for your village there, and you don't expect a payment, right? Works, obviously we have a lot of these intentional communities out there. But for me, that's not enough, to get to the next stage of taking action and building something together. For that, you need structure. For that, you need momentum. For that, you need something like a reward schema, right? So rewarding people for the work they do. But then the next question is, what kind of work are you actually doing, right? So you do need something like a quest or like a role to define what that thing is, right? And then the next question is, okay, in what context, right? Where are you operating in? And in what domain, where are your skills, where are your interests? And you need to define that structural element, right? So everything sort of builds on top of each other, right? So you create this, what we call a holonic architecture. That's a nested architecture. That's an organic, dynamic architecture, right? That evolves over time. It's not this rigid construct, that you see with this triangle things in the traditional organizational side. It's this sphere, right? That expanding sphere and also contracting sphere that brings people into the right places where they feel attracted to most, right? One more thing about the context that I feel is very important to talk in the community conversation here. There are different contexts. There's a context of a sort of a core team called that sort of nucleus that is very sort of goal oriented, right? Very structured and very much driven by the different roles and the people that are showing up there. But the community context is more fluid. It's more open, right? We had a recent discussion in the seed space, and Justin Joseph introduced the idea of scales, right? So, and then he related that to sort of quantum scales, right? And that brought me to, that's a good analogy here, right? To have sort of physics, compare that to physics, right? On a normal, physics, Newtonian physics level, you understand how things are working, apples are falling from the tree. That's the physics we all learned in high school, right? If you go to a quantum level, it doesn't apply anymore. The physics are completely different, right? You can't use it anymore. That's when you see this change in context, right? So you need some new rules, you need some new ways of making decisions in that context, right? Or you can go the other direction and say, well, on a cosmological scale, the Newtonian stuff doesn't apply either, right? There's a whole different, sphere and physics again in place that break all of these rules, right? So that is sort of for me to emphasize that when you operate in a community context, different physics apply there versus you're in a core team where there's more like a binary decision space, right? We need to get somewhere. We need to decide we go this path or that path. Because if we go both paths, then it's going to be too expensive or it fractionalizes the organization, right? So community spaces operate differently. And that's the sort of, I think, one of the breakthroughs we had last year when we started to talk about what community means in a DAO context, is to say, okay, so what are the physics of the community space? Obviously, we're coming together here. We can't apply sort of the notion of full voice power, because if you earn voice power, you contribute over long term, right? You have a role and you earn voice. That's how the DAO operates. You earn voice. That has nothing to do with the other tokens that we have, but the voice tokens give you the voice to help govern the organization. So communities don't operate that way. For that is people show up or they don't show up, right? And they need to have the same voice power, right? The same equality that you see of anybody who's showing up in the community. Yet they want to participate, right? They don't want to sort of have a say over the treasury, right? Or define the next policy for the organization, right? They don't care about that stuff. They care about, is the community happy? Is it aligned? Is it doing its thing to move the organization and the purpose of why we're coming together forward or not, right? So for that context, Hypha is preparing, a set of new features that are coming shortly to help that, right? To say, hey, there's community proposals, right? Hey, there's community badges that help you to acknowledge the tremendous work that's being put in by these community participants. And there are reward systems too, right? By participating there. And for that sort of, we're at the edge now of defining what that really means, and then bringing that into the DAO space for all of the DAOs out there to really start using that, really start empowering them, bringing their community that's been there out there, for a long time. And they've been waiting and waiting and waiting, right? We want to take action. We want to move forward. Now let's bring them together. Now we have the right space to launch this thing, right? And then solve these hard problems together, right? That's why we're here. Thank you.
Yeah, it gives me a great gateway because we are working on Hypha Labs too. So it's another community, base for Hypha, where we're gonna have ambassadors, we're gonna have affiliates to collaborate with, we're gonna have consultants, and also service DAOs that will help the community at large. And I'm very excited because it's a new beginning of a new exciting times for our community network and Hypha. So I wanted to do a little tiny plug in. And I'm looking forward to co-create and onboard as many people as they're interested in collaborating with us. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like we are kind of naturally coming to the end in a way that we discuss, and then we bring it in terms of kind of our current features and what is there. Just want to bring here in terms interesting discussion that we have the other day in terms of kind of integration of all of this. I don't know if that's going to be the final, but I think it's just worth mentioning that kind of you have this organization, what Joachim mentioned, like colonic structure and circle. So you have this big bubble, which is like your organization, which is like basically or like to go to Gabriel's thing, this intention that you want to bring with other people, right? And then inside that intention, you have this community circle, which is kind of the biggest circle where people, I see this between, it's like, oh, you're some strangers, and then you become interested. And then community space is kind of space where you can try things out, where you can connect with other people and to exchange things. And then the next step is kind of moving into core space, where you kind of want to commit more to the organization. And that's why we are trying to follow this structure between kind of having these separate spaces that are kind of contained into each other. And also just one part that we were kind of talking about that I want to mention in terms of, I see that in the beginning of Web3 space, people were really trying to push this thing in other direction of what traditional organization is like. So it's like, okay, we are anonymous, we are digital, we are not organized, right? And then I think we are slowly trying to bring that back, especially in Hypha, and trying to recognize, no, like doing things in this way does not mean that you are not organized, right? It just means that the way you are coordinating things and organizing things is a little bit different, but they are like methods. So all of these things still require some form of structure, but that structure is not rigid, but it's fluid, like between, so moving from like pyramids to the circular structure. So yeah.
Good stuff. I think we're rounding out as an interesting, in-depth conversation. It's amazing how we can take just a word, community, and just start to see how much dimension there is to explore. And of course, we could go deeper and deeper. Looking forward to our upcoming beta release of the Hypha platform and seeing these communities start to organize with the practical access to all of the features they've been waiting for, and more, and new ones that we're rolling out in the coming weeks and months. Thanks everyone for the conversation.